many thanks to John, and I'm gonna invite Petr, Carmen, John, and Vasa to come back to the podium. So John, you just sit for a couple of seconds. That's it. Could you come? Unfortunately, Carmen needs to leave really soon, in a couple of minutes, because her flight is coming. So I strongly suggest that the first questions are directly pointed to her. So you got the only chance to ask her because she's gonna leave in a couple of minutes. So then it's gonna be too late to think about to ask her something. So there are two girls with the microphones. So I'm sure that there's gonna be a question directly pointed to Carmen, so please. Okay, don't be shy, you have so much time to think about it. You've seen her beautiful lecture. 5 more seconds and then I'm gonna ask myself. Okay, so Carmen, please. Okay, Petr's gonna ask.
Do you hear me? Yes. Maybe I would have a question for you because I admired not only the architecture, of course, was the first what I admired, but also the drawings, the watercolor drawings that you have shown. Do you think it is a special? Could it be a special mean for architects to not only to express the idea, but to find a way how to understand the place, the site? I felt there is something if the painter tries to explain the landscape or something like that. Was it there?
Yes. Yes. Yes, no? We think these drawings as sketches try to show the main concept. So the main concept comes from to understand the site. So I think that's true. So it shows the power of the site, and it shows also the power or the aim of the concept. So yes, it's true.
I'm going to have one question related to the place where you live, to the place where you work. I loved the way how you presented in the presentation. You just said it super naturally, like it's our city, there was no other option or something like that. How is it really? Like, was it well thought? Did you think about there's other options, or like did you see any, like it was the only way?
No, really, so Olot is the place where we are from. So we went to Barcelona to have our architecture studies, the faculty of El Vallès. And then after our studies, we decided to come back home. And we have started. So we have not any practice to any other office. So we started as this. And because we had a very clever professor, he has said, if you want to be good architect, you have to say no to the first promoter who comes to your door to knock it. So we had this chance. A promoter came to offer us a project about, I don't know, maybe 30 or 300, I don't remember. A lot of apartments beside the coast, and we said no, thank you. So we thought it was a first good step to begin, and then we decided to make our first national competition. It was a competition for lighthouses. So it's the first slide that I have shown to you, and the slide of this structure of a lighthouse. So we won. So it was a very small competition for a very small construction, lighthouse. So we won. We said no to the promoter, and then we started till now.
Okay, there's a question. So,
hi, my name is Paul, and I would like to ask you if sorry, I'm here. I would like to ask you if you make any kind of program in your town where you live, because now in Czech Republic there are a lot of young architects who come from small towns or small villages or cities, and a lot of them they come back and then they make a program, or they make some kind of initiation for make the spaces better. I don't know if you understand me.
maybe also to influence activities within the city, like not only like work as an architect, but somehow steer the life in the community.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
This is it.
So, also, you have said we don't see the landscape, we only see the office. No? I think the town has its cultural life, and also we try to move also in this direction and to promoting some cultural events. But it's true that we do not participate a lot on the social life, but it's very comfortable to live there, because we go to work on food, we can go back home to have lunch, we can go with our children to the school on foot, so it's a very comfortable way of living. So that feels you more comfortable and more peaceful, so then that gives you the possibility of work also in this way, and maybe this also it's being reflected with the architecture. I don't know.
I would have one question for all of you. Basically, I think like if I get it correctly, you quite strictly said something like maybe it's not so different periphery than the center, or something like it doesn't matter so much where you work or something like that. But then all of you speak about landscape, and maybe if you would be living in so-called big centers, maybe the landscape would not be such a prominent issue in your work, because you don't see stars, because you don't relate to the nature, you don't relate maybe so much to the light, because there are other issues within the city. Like, do you feel it as an important influence in your work, or does it enable you to work on different issues that in the city?
I don't think the landscape, well, of course, as I showed, most of our projects happen in this destroyed landscape, in the periphery of the city of Ljubljana or whatever. The beautiful pictures were somewhere really far away. So in that sense, of course, we are aware of it, because it's part of our, let's say, definition of our work environment, even though we don't manage to enjoy it so often. But yeah, of course it's influential, but I don't think it's what constitutes the difference between centrality and peripheral. I don't think that it's the fact that we have landscape, no? I think, well, Petr proposed some other readings of this, but for us it's for sure one of the influences. This is why I say, I mean, there's the work of an architect is influenced today as ever, by millions of different conditions, and of course there are also the natural environment that we enjoy, live in, or perceive around us, but also by other things, also by the social relations, which I think are sometimes much more important for us around projects, or the financial conditions of the project, or the doing a lot with very little in terms of financial means, or doing a lot with very little in terms of material means, or doing a lot with a lot, which I didn't show today, but we also have very expensive projects. So it's not, I mean, these are all the things that constitute the work of an architect. It's not, I mean, the landscape is one of them, of course, a very important one, but not the most defining moment landscaping. For some people it's more important, obvious for RCR, but I don't think it's our case. I mean, it's very important.
Okay, John, sorry, like if Carmen wants to reply, now she has to reply and then she has to leave, I just heard. So. I'm sorry, Laura.
No, what I want you to say, it works, is that for us the approach to the landscape is the same as the build. So we have a landscape, and it's a natural situation or previous situation or initial situation. So when we work in a city or in an existing building, we understand them in the same way. So what we try to find is a very good relationship between the existing and the new one. And for us the purpose is to make a new landscape or a new construction or new space that has a very strong balance between the initial situation and the last. Trying to, at the end, to have a result that then you cannot separate anymore. So then you have a result that you understand both at the same time. Not following the same, but for getting a balance. So when we talk about landscape, we not only talk about green or trees, we talk about air. So we can find this connection to the sky with the stars even in the city, because we always can have different layers, so we can have build and void, so we can have these filters of perception, so we can have this feeling of landscape, but more than landscape, it's the universe or the air or the void, this connection with something more than not only the stones. I don't know if it's clear.
I'm afraid this is the last thing we heard from you. Like they have to take you, Carmen. You have to leave, I guess. So please, warm applause. John, the question remains. I don't know if you still remember it. It was about like once you work in so-called periphery and like outside in the countryside, like the majority of aspects of your work you show is related to the nature, to the sky, to the air, and something like that. And was it also the reason why you came back there or something like that? That if you would be practicing still in Tokyo, maybe you would be dealing with completely different issues?
Okay. Well, I'd say it's one big reason why I moved from, let's say, living in New York to where I live now is because of that big difference. I mean, it's actually funny. I mean, I talk about the stars, but in New York you never see the stars. You never see the stars. You see a moon. And we were talking about going to Nova Scotia, and it used to blow us away. When New Yorkers go up to Nova Scotia and they see the sky, it's just absolutely, it was an incredible experience. And for me, it's a huge difference living in a place which is far from, like, the city, actually. And for me, I much prefer that experience. For lots of reasons. I mean, it's like you're surrounded by lots of things which are just very beautiful all of the time. And for me, that's a very, very important thing. But also, it's a different kind of social world. And for me, it's a much better place to practice architecture. Like, for example, we were talking about this, if you're an architect in New York, of course there's lots of really good architects in New York or in every major city. But it's very impossible, very difficult for them to actually make work. because all the projects are huge in New York or in major cities. And it's very hard for young architects to get a chance to make projects. Whereas when you live in the countryside, like where I live, it's actually quite easy. I mean, I don't think it's so difficult. And it's also a much more pleasant way to live because the kind of people you're working with are very ordinary people, or like local community groups. So I'm doing projects all the time, either with individual clients for houses, or else I'm doing projects with local community groups for small buildings like cultural centres or art centres. And for me, that's far more rewarding than working for a big corporation in New York, or even for some very glamorous clients like the Guggenheim in New York. I mean, it sounds fantastic from the outside to work with these clients and do these projects, but for me inside it was a very empty experience. Because at the end, it's all about things which, like it's about money, or it's about fame, or it's about very empty things. And you spend 2-3 years working, making a beautiful project for these people, and then at the end you think it's like such bullshit, basically. Whereas when I'm working in small communities where I work and I do an art centre, it's fantastic because it's real artwork coming from the ground that means something to the people, and it's a very it's the real life of the place. It's not bullshit. It's a very real project. So for me, the combination of the landscape and the people and the kind of people I'm dealing with all the time as clients and also as builders is fantastic. I mean, we talked earlier, like for example, if you're living in a big city, the attitudes among people are basically very distrustful. So like the way you organize your project is protecting yourself against lawyers and against getting sued and so on. Whereas where I practice, the relationships between people are very, very good relationships. So with the builders, they're my friends, and we know each other for years, and I can completely trust them. And also I can trust them to do really excellent work. So when I'm working with these people, it's a real pleasure. And I don't think I would have that experience when I was living in Dublin, for example, or in a big city. So it's a completely different way of living. And I think when you're making architecture, you have to basically be very positive in yourself, in your spirit. So if I'm living in a place which is very beautiful, and I basically have a good feeling about the people around me, my clients, the people I live with, the builders, it's basically very positive. And so because of this, I can really see the stars. I can really see the clouds. I'm not thinking about other bullshit, you know? And for me, that's a big plus. And I think also one thing about my work, for example, is, I mean, I actually work on my own, and I work on very small projects, and I think it just shows, like for young architects, especially students, it's possible for it's much better to, I think, go in this kind of direction than to go to work for some big, offices in Prague or in Paris or London or somewhere else. At the end, you're in a much better situation where you're in a smaller environment where you can do, the level of the work you do is always up to yourself. You can do the best work in the world in the middle of nowhere. It's just, the limitation is actually yourself. Yeah.
Any questions from the audience, please?
I have a question for Vasa. I'm Hans Ibelings. And you were talking about these conditions. But if there are many conditions influencing the architect or architecture, then it still sounds rather general and abstract. And referring to one of the things you said about this house surrounded by illegal houses, which have become the sort of model or template for new development, and your clear opinion that you should reject this kind of contextualism based on this illegal housing. It seems that it's not just being immersed in conditions, but it's taking a position there. And if you say there are a million conditions influencing architecture, it sounds, according to me, a bit abstract. So maybe you could elaborate a bit on how to deal with that.
But it's more like a tool. No? I mean, I didn't mean this kind of just a registration model of the surrounding, let's say, universe of the project, but more like a tool that helps you reevaluate things in the maybe right way for each particular project or for each particular situation. Of course, there is a set of decisions that you are taking, but I think that I was just trying to point out that let's say the point of departure can be much wider than limiting yourself with 2 or 3 particular and not necessarily even beautiful or clever or situations, that you actually have to take into account the world with all the shit that comes with it. And that it might not, and sometimes it might also constitute the only possible, let's say, space for an architect to work with. And of course you have to make the decisions. The conditions are just, it's just a kind of palette of things that you see around you when you face a project, not only physically, but also with the whole context of the project.
The last option for the last question. Yeah, that's over there. I'm gonna bring it.
Hello, my name is Ondřej. I would like to ask, do you think the globalization actually makes the opportunities of periphery, say, same as in the center, or are there still any obstacles, hurdles that is the periphery any disadvantage actually, or is it not?
I got the periphery in center and not much more. Can you say it once more?
The program is acoustic in this direction.
Can you say it once
Can you come here?
I wanted to ask. do you think there are any obstacles to be working on the periphery, or does the globalization make your position equal to when you would be working in the center? Simple as that. I think this concerns John surely more than you, but
I mean, I don't come from Ghana. I live there. I worked there for 15 years. I feel comfortable there. I don't know. It's very tricky. This idea. This is why I was a bit confused. What would be the idea of the center today? Are we going to talk about the center as a center of economic power, or are we going to, from the architectural standpoint, talk about the idea of centers as a point in the, let's say, architectural map of the world, where maybe the most interesting work is being carried out? Or even, are we going to talk about the centers as the centers of excellence, like schools around the world, which mainly at the moment produce, let's say, or encourage an interesting research platforms? So, I don't know, it's a question of choice. I think, what do you consider in this case a center? I mean, if from my position or from Hans's position, Netherlands in 1989 to 1992 was the center of the world because architecture, because all of the interesting things, or let's say a lot of the interesting things at that point in the history of architecture, things were happening there. Now, I don't think Slovenia, Netherlands can claim, let's say, it's decentrality. So this is why he was also not living there. So the centers, the idea of centers in architecture is very, very vague and also can shift very much. Of course, in this case, we're looking at centers. Let's say we're looking at smaller architectures in not necessarily inside the urban centers, but easily it's not central to Prague. I mean, I think that I've seen much more interesting work here. So does that constitute living as a center in Prague, maybe periphery? So in that sense, I think it's just a question of choice. I mean, literally speaking, because of course I knew, despite that maybe it also becomes part of this periphery, I knew Percy, I didn't know that some architects from Prague. So for me, from my point in space, some few thousand kilometers away, I knew the work that was happening here, not the work that was maybe carried out in Prague years ago. So this is why I think this is a tricky question. You have to really clarify. You have a very clear definition which is completely acceptable, but not acceptable, maybe not acceptable 100% for me, because I see it more banal and more straightforward. So I don't think that any place in particular, and especially today, is a center or periphery, or maybe you could propose, is the concentration of power going to be the constituting element of centrality on a particular point? In that case, Brussels is probably the center. And we are at the periphery of Brussels. That includes Prague as well, and includes Sudan. Or it's going to be an architecture.
like the availability of materials or anything. But again, probably it concerns more John than you. So.
Maybe I'm just going to evaluate a bit of it. John, there's still a strong notion between, of course, like young architects or like young people that huge centers, and by huge I mean cultural centers, like historical cultural centers, are very appealing because of the lifestyle, because of the culture, but also because so-called like pre-summed opportunities, because like more clients, more options or something. But if I understand you, like you say, it's completely the opposite.
Not exactly, okay. Nothing is simple, okay. I mean, I can understand why people want to go to big cities to be architects, okay. I mean, I did that myself. I lived in Tokyo, I lived in New York, you know. I mean, it's for lots of reasons. It's not just architecture. You know, it was like, New York is a fantastic party town, you know. So it was just a fantastic place to live. But I think maybe that's a good experience for, it's a kind of a normal pattern for young architects. They go to the big city and they have a great time, you know. And they're working and then they're hanging out and there's lots of parties and it's very interesting. I mean, New York was an amazing place to live. But at a certain point you change. And maybe it's a good experience for a period of time. In my own experience, it was much better for me to, I mean, I'm glad I don't live in New York now, okay? So now I live in the West Coast of Ireland, and I'm quite happy to be there. And maybe sometimes I go back to New York and I visit friends, or I go to London, or I go to Paris, and I enjoy going to those cities. But I always enjoy going back to where I live, you know. So it depends on what age you are, it depends on what's important. But in terms of practicing architecture, for sure it's a very good place. Like lots of places outside of the major centres are actually very, very good places to practice architecture. And the question of globalization is a funny one because of course we're all affected by everything, you know. Even the weather that we have in the West Coast of Ireland is affected by like China at this point in time. It's quite incredible. Everything is so connected. And we all sit at computers and I look at the internet and I see projects from all over the world every day. And that's very important, and it's very important for all of us that we're all connected. And I mean, even coming to, for me, it's fantastic to come to Czech Republic and have this experience. And for the Czech students to come to Ireland was fantastic. But at the same time, I live in Ireland, and I live in a very specific part of Ireland. And I work on very specific projects. And one of the fantastic things in architecture is we have all these big conversations. But at the end, you're faced with one project on a real site and a real client. It's a family with kids. And the really important thing is you can take all of this richness in your experience and your knowledge, and you have to apply yourself to a very, very specific situation. And when you do that, you have to be very true to that situation. You know, so the people that I'm working for, where I live, the work has to be really true to that place. You know, it can't be taking something from outside that's not digested properly. The work, wherever you're making your work, has to be really true to that specific situation. And that's the same if you're living in a centre or outside a centre or whatever else. I mean, to me, I don't see such a big difference, really. No. Okay?
Thank you very much.
For a second.
Okay, Vasa is going to continue.
If we accept this, let's say, the architecture we are all looking at in the last 5 or 6 years, I think they are mainly constitute your peripheral positions. And I think those peripheral positions are in fact the most interesting positions that we are all looking at in the past few years. Because if I'm now, as he was talking, I was trying to imagine this, and I think that maybe the true or genuinely interesting things are, at least in the last 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 years, in fact, happening within the European space, definitely within the peripheral conditions, rather than what you call what center.
Okay, please thank to all our speakers.